Good afternoon, or should I say good evening? I'm not too sure what 5 o'clock is these days. Before I start, I'd like to thank Yusra, Ishmael, Sipindile, Marilyn, and Wesley for hosting such a beautiful, thought-provoking, critical human rights festival. Such meaty conversations happening, and thank you. And before we start, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Kamkhelo Walaza. I am an assistant curator at the moment, immersion curator as well. And I'm currently doing my master's at Witwatersrand, and it's about Black middle class, an autoethnographic research and investigation of a Black middle class woman moving in upward mobility. And I use performance art as a methodology to sort of investigate about this. And around me and surrounded with me right now is amazing performance artists. We have Karen, we have Gavin, we have Babene, we have Wezile with us today. So I'd love to ask, let's start with Karen to please introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Karen Bested. I'm a multimedia performance artist, actress, activist, and art director. My performance art is very much activism based, so I do interventional performance art, body installations. A lot of my performance art has got a durational aspect to it. As an activist, my focus is around gender-based violence and the oppression of the femme body, and I use performance art to bring across messages about gender-based violence.
Thank you, Karen. Can you please have Wesile, please do introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Wezile. Yeah, I'm an artist and art practitioner who uses performance, installation, and video as a tools to social change or to echo all the subjects that I deal with in my work: memory, the concept of love, the concept of being displaced. So yeah, I work around human behavior and what is our relationship between the spaces and the buildings, the architecture, and yeah, basically that's my practice is around those subjects.
Thank you so much, Wesley. I'd like to pick a bone. I don't want to pick right now. Please, can you pick either Gavin or Babin to go next?
I should. Yes. Gavin, yes, please. Be the honors.
All right.
Hello, everybody. I'm Gavin Creston. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a performance artist working in live art. I also curate and educate in live art and performance. I think my work predominantly concerned with notions of worlding and kind of queering spaces and actions. And I also really enjoy working with young artists through a platform that I direct called the Live Art Arcade.
And then we have Babin, please.
Hello, thank you all once again for organizing this. I am Vabene Elikemfiachi, also known as Craziness Artist. I work as a multidisciplinary activist, curator, mentor, and the director of Purple Chris International Artist Residency. My practice or my performances focus on the challenges of queer people and the violence that marginalized groups face in different countries and in different contexts, and also anti-Blackness and how we have internalized oppression within Africa, even after independence and after colonialism.
Thank you so much. Such a great panelist that we have today. Thank you so much for the introductions. But let's start with the meatness and why we came here. Can we violate our own body rights to make art? So as we know, performance art or performance artists use their bodies as a subject and an object for their art and how they express their views. We know that like the body and sight and audience play like a pivotal role to be able to practice and like sort of provoke, awaken, to make people feel something. Sometimes people are stoic in this situation and they feel nothing, you know? And with this in mind, with your own practices, right? And other practices that you may know as well, can we violate our own body rights to make art? Let's just answer the topic question before we go into more meatiness. Does anybody want to start? Gavin, would you like to say something about that, please?
Then I saw Karen was about to just unmuted herself. So I think Karen, please step in if you would like to.
Yes. Okay. So for me, I have almost a question about the question, because it's almost a bit of a problematic thing of when we say, can we violate our own body rights? It's like they're two opposing things. Because for me, my body rights, or my human right to my body, is the right to make my own decision of what it is I do with my body. So when I, as a performance artist, decide to do something, it is a decision I made myself. And I think, yes, okay, so sometimes as performance artists, we push our bodies to certain levels, to certain extents. It might not always be healthy for the body, but it's still something we decided to do ourselves. So according to who am I violating my body if it was my choice to do this to my body, and it's my human right to decide what I do with my body? So that was kind of my feeling about just the like you say, the first question of the topic.
I think it's quite interesting. Gavin, I saw you want to say something there.
No, just I completely agree with Karen, and I think what it boils down to is a sense of consent. I think that's what's really important, is what are we consenting to and with, even if the consent is not necessarily with another person. It might be a consent with your materials or your equipment or your environment or just your time or space. But I think consent is incredibly important. And so it becomes a bit of a double bind of that I mean, it's difficult to violate your own body to make art. You know what I mean, because you make your own decisions. But I think there are questions about some processes that maybe, I don't know, you hear some stories of some really crazy processes some artists put other artists through in order to make art. And there are maybe some ethical questions with regards to consent or how far one goes. Yeah. Sorry, but I think where's Zile was also going to say something.
No, you're putting me on the spot. No, actually, I think I slowly agreed. I mean, like I'm with Karen when it comes to the whole question, you know, because on my side I was like, how can we suggest the act of generational trauma, which is violence, is a tool to make art? You know, which is we can use art, right, to erase that violence. For me, it was like, how can we use something that we're trying to erase to make art, you know, because it isn't something that shouldn't be, you know, part of us. It should be like erased completely, even like violence, because you are really you are violating yourself, you know. Yeah, I think maybe it's sin. Other performances are seen as a violence, but it's somebody who's revisiting the trauma and trying to find ways to be familiar within these unfamiliar situations. Hence, to the other people, it's seen as violating, you know. So when I saw the whole topic, I was actually kind of working around the whole question and the way use of the word and all that. I don't think there's any artist intentionally be there present just to violate themselves in that, because their life is already been violated. They are constantly performing their lives to add on that as part of a performance isn't something that I would say we are using it as a tool for us to make art.
Yeah, yeah, thank you very much. I think this topic is of, since I saw the topic, I've been thinking about it a lot. And for me, it depends on in which context are we even using the word violate? That's the first thing. In which context does an artist, or would an artist be considered violating the body, or would an artist consider violating their own body? Because to violate something does not necessarily come with aggression or violence. This is also one thing I think we should understand, that violation does not necessarily come with disgust. Okay, but violation comes with rules and structures that are created and are broken. So what are the structures and norms and rules and prohibitions that an artist has already made for their own body that they are breaking it? So if there is a violation of rights of an artist's body, that means an artist has already accepted some doctrines and norms for your own body, and going against it becomes a violation. But if we truly own our own body, and then we do what we will for the body, then it's not a violation. It can be a projection of human right violation, but not an artist's body violation. So so this is one of the things that for me, when I was looking at the whole topic, I was thinking about it so much, that if I am a Muslim and I am supposed to be fasting within the Ramadan and I eat, then I'm violating something, you know. But if I am not a Muslim and Muslims are fasting and I eat, I don't violate anything in relation to my body. So if I am an artist and I'm a black queer artist, and my queerness has already been criminalized in many contexts and many situations, and it's a taboo. And now I reclaim this attitude and I project it to the public that, hey, this is who I am and this is me. And I present my naked body in public. Would we be referring this also as a violation? But then if a cis hetero straight person carry this black queer body and put it in a public space in shame, would it be the same? So yeah, so for me, the whole question about violation also comes with the context in which we are using it and what are the rules that we create for ourselves as artists.
So to pick up on what Gavin said and what you just said, I think if we look at when there's another person involved, we can get to a point where a body or a person's rights are violated. I mean, if you, for instance, look in a space where you're working with someone that you might not know, you might not have trust with the person, and then there are certain things that's happening and you feel uncomfortable with, you could feel or be sense that, okay, cool, you were violated in that point. But at the same time, it is also, I think, a thing that as a performance artist or performer, you've got to have that confidence to be able to go and speak up when you are in a space or when something is happening that is making you feel uncomfortable, to say that that is what you are feeling. Because if it's not the intent of the other performer or the person who are maybe directing this, if it's not their intent to make you feel uncomfortable or to violate you, and for themselves that act would be fine, they would never know that you are being violated unless you say something. So I think if you have to almost say violating your own body, I would say would be if you are in a situation where you don't speak up for your own body, and that way you can maybe say that you're allowing your own body to be violated because you're not speaking up. But I don't think it is, if it's something that you've decided for yourself to do, I don't feel that that can be a violation of the self if you yourself has made that decision.
Yeah, I think what Karen and Sabine, what you're saying regarding context, I think is so key and important, and establishing the playing field from the get-go, and acknowledging that this playing field can also change, and that you have the right to question that. But I also was thinking in terms of there's human rights, and what was said earlier was so beautiful, that whatever your doctrine is, only you can violate that. So I mean, as a queer person, like anything queer is not a violation for me. So in a way, I think for many of us, performance becomes a way to celebrate our body rights and to really speak our body rights. But I think there can be a friction when we kind of talk about context. You've got like your own intrinsic kind of cosmic body rights, but then you also exist within a context, a country, a space. And so, you know, some spaces don't allow for that, don't allow for an expression of queerdom or an expression of blackness or whatever, because of the legislation of the country or whatever. And I think there becomes a rift. And I wonder if we almost kind of take it for granted in South Africa that we have this constitution where any mode of self-expression is very much acceptable. You know, as long as you aren't inciting violence, right? We can express ourselves where, you know, gay pride is allowed in South Africa, where there are countries and spaces where just simply existing as queer is a violation in and of itself, but on the country, not on the personal body, purely based on the legislation of, I suppose, the larger state organ. Yeah.
I think it's actually quite interesting because as everybody's speaking, all of you guys are sort of just agreeing. I'm seeing a lot of like embodied nods on the head, you know, and it's making me think, then if it's not violent, then what would you name it? What would you say it is then, you know? Because I think that's also a very important way of identifying with what performance art is, you know, in the context of like human rights as well. Then what would you name it? What would you say it is if it's not violent?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Before I respond to that, I want to get back to something. The fact that we are asking the question of what does violation means, even in different contexts for artists, and at what point do we even think that artists really are not or are violating their body, does not mean that artists do not violate their body to do art. Because the question is about, do artists have to violate their body to make art? And yes, artists have to and do violate their body. Like I mentioned, it depends on the doctrine that you've created for yourself. Okay, so now in my context now, if I wouldn't be happy, I don't walk on the street naked. I don't walk on the street with chains on my hands. I don't walk on the street with mats on my face. You know, I only do that as a protest. I only do that as an advocacy. I only do that as a confrontation. So in this context, I am doing something that I wouldn't do to myself if I am in my comfort zone. So I have to actually defile my body to be able to speak the hard language, because I only have to say it in the hardest way that it could hit the people I want them to hear it. So it's very confrontational, you know. It does not necessarily need to be shocking, but it's confrontational. So in this context, if I take my body and chain myself on a cross or in any way in pain, I am actually violating myself in a way that I won't do this if there is no agency to it. So in this sense, then I'm talking about, yes, I'm violating my body to make art, and deliberately I'm aware that I have to take some risk and I have to put my body in some dangers to do the art, you know. But in other situations where we will consider ourselves violated by other people who speak certain languages to us as queer and Black persons, we reclaim the languages and it's no longer violation. Negro has been reclaimed by some group of Black people. Queerness have been reclaimed by some group of queer people. It wasn't meant for us. So when we now call ourselves queer people, we are no longer violating ourselves, but we are reclaiming the language. And similarly, we can reclaim acts, we can reclaim actions, and then we no longer consider that as a violation.
Oh yeah. I just want to answer your question about what can we name. There's been a lot of things that are happening regarding naming and renaming of things, because they have a way of creating boundaries, and those boundaries at the end of the day, they come back to us and all that. I mean, I think it's what's happened most of the performance artists, is the expectations of the audience, and now the artist is subjected to reposition themselves in a way where the audience will be welcoming or have a reception to that. So the artist now doesn't have such a willingness to present any kind of work, because you have been subjected as a male performance artist, or as a female performing artist, or as a Black artist. This is what these are your limits and all that, So I'm very kind of I'm very kind of sensitive when it comes to naming, what other way do we use? But one thing I can say is that instead of violence, there's a lot of comfort and discomfort performance artists go to. We literally like tools of actually echoing or expressing what is really the matter, probably the elephant in the room, or something that is not dressed on the table. How the artist does that thing, I think, is what the public should be welcoming, not necessarily welcoming, but with an open mind, that I'm going to a performance space where I should expect anything at any time, and it's my time for me to learn on whatever the performance artist is going to be doing. I think it's that the familiar and unfamiliar. So when you say what can we name, I think we can just leave it as it is, and let the people breathe in the practice, in the space, and understanding the whole idea around performance artists, that it can come in various ways, in different dynamics, Yeah.
Babin, please.
Yeah, Wesley, thank you so much for voicing that out. The naming is creating boundaries, and if we look at all that is happening in the world, it's about categorization. This is why we are battling and fighting, because if you don't fall into the categories, then you are not. So even performance art must be defined in a very specific way for you to be even acknowledged and legitimized as a performance artist. Because we do not understand that performance art is not the same as theater, which was also based on this naming categorization. However, to answer the question that you're asking, is that if we do not call it violence, why is it that when a doctor performs an euthanasia for someone, it is not called violence, it is called euthanasia? Why is it that when a surgery is performed for someone who has a breast cancer, it's not called violence, but it's called an operation, a rescue? So why is it that when an artist in performance and dealing with trauma and pain and the violence they are suffering, whether as a racial or as gender or in any other context, decide to enact similar act on the body, then this is violence? It is because there has been a structure that is being built that we cannot own our own body. When you attempt suicide in some countries, you are put to jail for several years, which is more violence than the suicide that you have attempted. But then you can be sentenced to death by the same country or the same government. But when you think your life is over, you think that you can't live any longer, and you attempt, not even that you, because of course they can arrest a dead person, not that you have committed a suicide, but attempted, and They rescue you, they put you in jail for several years under hard labor. So which one is violence? You know, it is because the person who owns your body, their actions on you is not violence. It's not considered because they own you. So this is the kind of contemporary ownership of the body by societies, by nations and states. You know, so when the church is performing exorcism and even beating you on the floor, expecting the devil to leave your body, this is not violence. But when an artist is actually jumping and screaming and doing all that, it is perceived as a kind of violence. So I just want to answer that, like Wesley already said, it's about the labels. And if we are not careful about all these labels and renaming, we will always be in these structures.
Karen, please.
Yeah, so I mean, there was a lot said now that I want to get back to, but I very much agree with Wazile about having things to have certain names or being labeled in certain ways. I think for myself, who came from an acting background, specifically was drawn to the performance art because there wasn't necessarily these structural labels of, if you do it, you have to do it in this way, and you have to do this, and there has to be that to be able to be seen as performance art. It was about expression and expressing however it is that you as an artist feel, or however you feel like you want to express it. And I think a problem that we have, and that's touching on what Vabene had said now, is certain things are done by other people and it's okay. Now that you are doing it as an artist, you might be doing it in such a way that it is not necessarily about how you're pushing yourself, but the audience member and how they perceive it, or what kind of a feeling they have, their comfort or discomfort. And because of that, it has now become their projection on you of, oh, but you're now violating yourself because they feel uncomfortable with it. And I want to almost take an example of, let's say, like we talk about performance artists, we very often we push our bodies to certain limits, to certain extremes. And you get people going, oh, are you crazy? Why would you do that to yourself? It's so unhealthy. It's so this. You can't push your body in that way. But for instance, in extreme sport or normal sport, most of it, people are also pushing their bodies to certain boundaries that's not necessarily normal, that can also be unhealthy. But yet, when those people reach their goal, when they achieve that impossible, they are praised and they are seen as so strong, and oh, you must be mentally so fit to have gotten to that point, and oh, you are putting new boundaries on what the human body can do. Yet when an artist pushes to a certain boundaries, just because the visual it creates might, as I said earlier, disturb or make a third person feel something, suddenly it's not okay anymore. Now it's violating. So I don't think necessarily it's about what we do to the body. It's about what we make people feel with what we do. And that is what people start questioning, or start, I think, pointing as, oh, it's violent, it's a violation, it's not right, it shouldn't be done, or you're crazy, you're just looking for attention, because it's not what we do, it's how we make them feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry, Wazile, did you want to?
No, sorry, I was saying that was good.
I mean, this is something I come up a lot against, and it's something I also talk about. I talk about sport and all of that as a thing. But I think we often forget, like, the bedfellow of violence is capitalism. And I think our things operate on different economies, and I think there's a reason why a certain level of violence is allowed in the police force and the religious sphere and the sporting, mediatized sport, and the sort of thing. And yet, ironically, it benefits from a certain capital where, in fact, I would argue the only where I think artists are violated the most might be in terms of their capital and economy. You know, that's where a lot of violation has. So I think there's something interesting there that you almost can monetize our violence or perceived violence to a way that you can with other like kind of specters of violence. Yeah, and just something that someone once said to me regarding naming and categories, and I think it's a lovely example for performance art. But this idea that you kind of don't shrink to fit into categories, but you rather just continue to expand, and it's kind of through the expansion that you find a sense of belonging, as opposed to a sense of fitting in or categorizing. Yeah, but I do think there's some kind of connection between perceptions of violence and capitalism, and there's a very sick process that is involved, that I don't think artists necessarily engage with, because I think we're quite anti that. Yeah, but some other words that crop up are like confrontation, advocacy, reclamation, celebration, confrontation, as opposed to violence, maybe.
I think with that said, I'll sort of pick up from always they spoke about like boundaries, right? And I often think of boundaries and what it means for the artist, and in other as well, in relation with your art as well. Do you think that we need boundaries to not I'm not going to say the word violate anymore. I'm going to say to confront, rather, our own human rights as performers, and to also think of this, of the other, do you have boundaries for yourself doing your art and for the other person? How do you identify with the line? How do you identify the line between trust and confrontation?
Yeah, thank you for that question. But do you mind if I respond to the Facebook question before, so that we connect it straight? So there's a question from Facebook that has been posted that by Karabo, and it says, upon reflection on our past works, do we see any of our performances as kind of violation? And if so, how did we restore ourselves? And if that happened through art or by other means. So yeah, so because your question is also about the boundaries and about trust of people within the space. So this question is also very relevant if the violation was happening by ourselves or through other means. And yes, like I explained earlier, we have violated ourselves, or I have violated myself in several performances in order to respond to the situations that we find ourselves currently, and also as a means of allowing the audience to experience our vulnerability. Because sometimes if this audience do not witness our vulnerability and do not experience it, they easily can dismiss our struggle. They easily can just think that, oh, everything is fine. Because when you are too privileged, you are never able to see what is happening to those who are less privileged. So as an attempt to create a kind of witnesses to our struggle, we sometimes go the extreme to violate the body, to put the body in spaces that even the body does not belong, and situations that the body could not even take, just for us to be able to make statements. So it's like kind of manifestation. So in this manifestation, we violate the body. And yes, to restore ourselves in many ways, yeah, it's quite difficult, and it will depend on individuals or individual artists how we restore ourselves. Some of us, knowing that it is done, knowing that the statement has been made, because silence is a deadly killer, a deadly killer, or how they call it, deadly disease. Silence can kill. So sometimes speaking through our artworks is liberating. So that is a whole restoration. It's a protest in itself. So you feel like you gain the voice to say something, and that alone can be healing process for some of us. Others, they have to go through different rituals and different activities to be able to restore themselves and come back. Yeah, and come back to it. So this is one of the things. However, connecting that to the question of trust, is that, or the boundaries, that yes, when we perform, depending again in context, when we perform, we are sometimes aware of audience curiosities. We are sometimes aware of audience also wanting to push boundaries, because what our body in some of these situations become objects of interest. So we are objectified, and therefore we are allowing audience not to even see the life in us. And so it's very easier for an audience to touch you in certain performances than if this audience does not see this work within the context of performance art. If this body is just on the street, people may be disgusted by it and even try not to come closer. But as soon as it's also within the framework of art and a framework of performance, it actually invites some people to test their own boundaries. And this is where we can talk about the vulnerability as a performance artist or people using their body in works. And it's not about trusting the people, it's about trusting the process. Yeah, for me, it's not about trusting the people, because I don't know how many people I can trust coming to my performance. I'm having a performance and maybe there are over 100,000 people gathering around me. How do I trust that nobody is going to break the boundaries or invade the space? But I have to trust the process. And in trusting the process, I have to either draw a line between me and audience, or be aware that this could happen and that could happen. And whatever way it is part of the work. So I have to make certain decisions. And this is the trusting of the process. So if you watch some of Abramovich's performances, there were some of them that audience were not allowed to interact with Abramovich. You know, there were clear boundaries that were drawn with ropes blocking. You know, it's about knowing, it's understanding the processes and trusting it. In other words, audience were allowed to even use guns. So yeah, with loaded bullets. So yeah, so then you can think about it in this context that, okay, so what happened? Yeah, so for me, I think it's not about trusting the people, but it's rather trusting the process.
Okay. I'll respond to the whole concept of trust and boundaries in a performance or process. I think when we talk about that, we have to look at the history we have with our bodies as performance artists and also as an audience, the relationship we have with our bodies. Firstly, to most of us, we don't have any base or very solid relationship with our bodies, you know. So there's a lot of things that come back when someone else is touching you in a certain way, or someone is watching that is being touched. There's a lot of reflection. So understanding the background and the history of our bodies, where do we come from, or what have we seen happening to other people, does play a whole, it does have an impact in the work. And also from where we're coming and how we tell these stories through performance art, sometimes they become very foreign to other people because they're also trying to navigate themselves through all these things, you know, because they don't know what is boundaries. They've never exercised boundaries. They don't know what is consent. They don't know what is trust, because maybe they've never came to into a space where they were introduced to trust, to boundaries, you know. So now there's a lot of establishments that are going on, and most of the time as performance artists, we present work sometimes for ourselves, to heal ourselves as part of the process, and the audiences, they are just invited to see that, or sometimes it's a reflection of what has been happening on the other side. So when it comes to trust and boundaries, it is a process. It is an ongoing process, because that has to do with a lot of kindness. It has to do with a lot of love, which is, those are such a very foreign concept to some other people, because we using the medium to actually revisit all those things that we don't want to visit. So now we are constantly have to build these boundaries that will benefit us at the end of the day. And how we do that, we have to find ways to use materials, or we use tools that are very welcoming to us, because we have been defined, or we've been presented with a lot of angles or materials that are unfamiliar with us. So now how do we get out from that and build all these boundaries that we are willing to build them, and the boundaries are meant to protect us, or they're meant to guide us into a more safe space that we always talk about them.
Gavin, please.
Yeah, it's interesting, because one often talks about performance artists or contemporary artists as boundary breaking, and here we are talking about how we're actually boundary asserting. And I think that's quite an interesting take. But I think it's in breaking the boundaries that one becomes vulnerable, that you need to assert alternative boundaries so that your vulnerability is honored and not violated, right? But I just wanted to add that I think these boundaries these considerations, I don't think they only crop up in the moment of performance. I think it also does happen in the publicity and the rehearsal and the contract signing and the site recce's and all of that. And just a bit of an anecdote to add what Verbeen was saying, this idea of trusting the process and not necessarily the people, or rather trust the artwork. So I often perform nude or naked, but I often have my genitals like tucked and taped away. And there was a performance in which audiences could kind of do things to me. There were materials out there, and everyone was quite honored, or not honored, rather humble about it, and was quite honoring of my body and of the kind of openness. But there was one person who did try to take the tape off and reveal myself, and whatever. And what was really lovely in that moment, before I could even do anything, the audience stepped in. So I think that's quite lovely, that you don't have to trust the people all the time, because I think there is still a lot of good in humanity, as much as there is a lot of evil in humanity. But I think the trust can come through the people, through the process, in those moments. You hope. I mean, just like if you would see any violation, you would step in and try and do something about it. I mean, one hopes, I suppose, but then there's the risk of you being violated yourself, of course, depending on the context. Yeah.
So I think for myself, and I think for I can probably, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I think you can all agree that, I mean, as performance artists, we have a very tight relationship with our own self, with the body, with the mind, with the emotion. And as Gavin was saying, I mean, it's not like a performance is just suddenly happening. There's, when you conceptualize, I almost want to say, you do ask your body permission of, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this to you? Will you be okay? And also asking the question, if I then do this, is this necessary? Because I think a lot of the time people go, oh, performance artists are just doing something for shock value. They're just trying to get attention. They're trying to be different. That is very seldom, I think, the actual point that we're making, but there's something that we want to say, and this is the way we feel we need to say it. And for me, it's in my process, there's always, when I begin and I have an idea, I ask, is this necessary to myself? And by the end of the process, if I still feel that, yes, this is necessary, and I have asked and I've gotten permission from my physical self, then it might be shocking to some other people. It might be disturbing. It might be whatever a person is doing. But I think Waziri was saying something earlier. It's almost like it's healing for yourself sometimes, even though it might not be easy, even though it's exhausting or unhealthy or difficult, it's still in a way healing something, because you've gone through that process of, this is what I need to do to also show other people what it is I'm saying, or to try and almost want to say spread that healing. I'm not sure if it actually makes sense when I say it like that.
Does make sense.
Okay. Good. And then I just wanted to touch also on nudity. Gavin, when you were talking about nudity, and I had a performance once where, I wasn't even fully nude, and it was a protest piece about gender-based violence, and a man came up to me and he said to me, but I'm objectifying myself, and how can I now speak against gender-based violence if I'm there and objectifying the female body? And it was just like, at that point, I didn't even answer. But the thing is, I don't objectify myself. Objectification is in the eye of the beholder. So you, as a person looking at me, you are looking at me in maybe a sexual way, which is then that you are objectifying me. Because the naked body is not, you see naked and you're supposed to think sex. Our most natural state is naked. We all have a naked body. We are all nude. So why is this most natural state of self a sign of objectification? And again, it comes back to the audience view of it and not your own expression.
They're projecting, I think.
Thanks so much, Karim, for that. Thanks so much for pointing that out. Yeah.
So we have a Facebook question from Alan Parker, and the question is, I think performance artists who do this, when they place their bodies in the context where violation is possible or probable, become mediums for audience to reconsider their own complicity in enacting violations against bodies in other contexts outside of the performance itself. May the panelists please comment on this instance in their own work where they experience this sort of role or conduct.
They experience what?
Can the panelists maybe comment on this instance in their work where they experience this this medium, this type of role that they're doing, from the question above?
Well, I think that's kind of what Karen and I spoke about, those examples. Maybe the others would like to give example. I don't know. I think so.
I think on my side, on my practice, is my performances are quite the opposite. I won't say really the opposite, but they're quite I was actually challenging the expectation of what is expected from a Black performance artist, and I was also looking at other ways of introducing kindness and love and of stillness, because sometimes people, when there's nothing happening, they get frustrated, as how the audience wants always to be driven everywhere. So for me, it was trying to introduce that this is also part of the performance, and that is also part of the performance. It is you as an audience to come to Karen's show, to Gavin's show, to Valen's show, to open up yourself, to come on a clean page. I'm here to engage, to reflect, and to so because it has been so narrow, not that it's done by performance artists, but the audience, and I won't say the curators, but the organizer, but it has been, the performance has been organized in a way that if this thing is not happening, we're going to need time to think about this kind of a performance. Or if this performance is taking us into this place, is shocking us, we have to re-question it. But Why questioning the performance but not yourself? That are you welcoming enough to really sit down and engage in Gavin's work of what is this? Why am I here? These are the questions that you are supposed to engage in them, not saying, oh, I was taken to this place. Most of the people, they don't want to leave the familiar. And it goes back to us as performance artists now to kind of explain ourselves why we left the familiar, which is we never even created the familiar behind, you know. It is quite of those things that they just need to let go of that. And of course, so we cannot say that as also as performance artists, the organizers of the festivals or people that are inviting performance artists or all these institutions, they need to open up into knowing that this is a performance artist, another art medium that is respected, that deserve to be in the way that the artists imagine their work, reimagine their work, whatever racial age is in, but the respect that people need to come in when they go into a space of performance artists, because these are all multiple mediums coming together here. And if this is what you're given, give out your clean page to actually learn from that or able to respond from that.
I just wanted to say something about, you were talking now about the silence, and it's been so interesting for me to see how incredibly uncomfortable audience members can become when you are just still. When you're not saying anything, you're not moving, there's just an image for them to look at, where if that image was on a canvas, they'd be able to silently stand and look at it, but suddenly it's a body that's still, and that silence becomes so incredibly uncomfortable for them. And it's like, oh, but why is nothing happening? Suddenly something needs to happen. And just that uncomfortableness that's created in an audience when you're just silent.
Because you're expected to do something, Karen. Sometimes
you're expected to perform. You need to entertain.
Yes.
There's always this expectation of entertainment and an audience. Like I almost want to say, we were talking a little bit earlier, and I think there was a bit of a question about the difference between theatre and performance art. And I think a lot of the time, necessarily with theatre, people expect to be entertained. There's a story, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's music, there's dialogue. It can be extremely movingly sad. It can be funny, but there's a thing, there's a spectacle, there's an event where performance art can be completely silent and motionless. And that makes people uncomfortable because suddenly, like, they're not entertained.
Not even like to cut you, sorry, that even when it's performance, sometimes I can go to a performance, right? And then I'll go with this expression of how I was violated as an audience, but forget that it was not about me. They invited me to that performance that was so personal to them. And I was there as an audience to be invited in that personal space. So at any point, I cannot feel like the performance has to be about me as an audience. I need to just allow myself that they invited me into their personal space, that it was so emotional for them and they had to bear themselves out there. You know, it is all those things of how the audience receive the work or take the work.
Robin, please.
Yeah, I think to respond to, again, the question of Alan Parker, I think Gavin touched on that, where Gavin was talking about, I guess Gavin was the one, but when Gavin was talking about something happening in the space of the performance and then other audience intervene, when we are talking about artists' role in this way, creating spaces and creating medium for audience to reflect, it's more about to reflect and meditate on the things that they do in daily life without necessarily noticing it or paying attention to it or being responsible to it. This is where artists insert their body and their performances in that space that allow you to begin to think. Because I always give it this example that when you are angry and you pull out a gun from your pocket and you shoot the next person, you have no emotions. You have no compassion. You are if I say no emotion, then maybe it's the wrong word, because anger is also an emotion. But you don't have compassion, you don't have good feeling, you don't have love. But then, could you be the same person standing there to watch another person pull out gun and shoot another person in front of you? That is a totally different thing. So when audience are within performance spaces, especially the ones that we would say artists are violating their body, that audience can project it and see that that's a violation, or audience can feel the violence on the body. In this context, the audience are not the people enacting the violence. So they have all the time in their life to reflect and to think about this action and to think about what does it mean to encounter that on the street or elsewhere. So then you are actually opening the brain and the mind of the audience to begin to think about how they participate in these things in their daily life without necessarily knowing. Because lynching is so common in some African countries now, which was borrowed from America, which was borrowed from America. The word even lynching is so American, borrowed from America. Then it's common. And then if they catch thieves in Ghana, I would say Ghana because that's where I come from, they would burn this person, pour fuel on you, beat you, and set fire, and you die on the street. If you see a performance artist doing this, you see audience screaming and audience getting emotional and audience wanting to even rescue. I was rescued in some of my performances by audience, and that means they have the good, the good heart is there that they could think and they could feel. But this same audience, if I was actually alleged as a gay or a thief on the same street, perhaps the same persons who rescue me would have participated in lynching me. So something is happening when performance artists are reinserting their body in the most uncomfortable situations, and then when we look at curated audience and non-curated audience, I have always described non-curated audience as audience who are aware that I'm going to the gallery to watch a performance art. They have already reprogrammed their mind that, oh, I can see any unexpected thing. Especially, okay, I'm going to see Vabene's performance. As for Bene, I know her. She could do anything. So there's nothing that should be surprising to see, even though I could be shocked but I shouldn't be surprised. Okay, this audience reprogram themselves before even going. But then when you place this same performance on the street, where ordinary person passing by does not even know the context, does not even know who Vabene is witnessing this, they will be so genuine and authentic in their response. Because they are not applauding the violence. They are not going to be applauding the pain. But in a gallery space, people could applaud your pain. Wow, you are enduring this pain all this while. It become an aesthetic. But then on the main street, people are drawn to it in a different context. They are drawn to it like, how? This is somebody's child. Why? And then you see even old people trying to intervene. So this is to Alan Parker's response, that when you look at performance artists reinserting themselves into these spaces, some of these things emerges and it births new ways of looking at human being and looking at the situation and looking at the society.
Well, thank you so much. I wish we could continue this conversation because there's so much to say, but Karen, Gavin, Babin, Wazile, do you have any last comments before we close off? All right, that's silence, and that that wraps it up.
Maybe my last comment will not be like, it will be, I'm leaving this with both we artists and also as audience, other audience who are watching us, that how can we all co-participate, or how can we actually embody art practice into a social life, that not only the artists are speaking the language, but as soon as it is inserted that even we as audience, we have be integrated immediately, because we are constantly thinking about all this process. How do we actually implement this, or how do we make this become visible, like possible? So this is just a question I'm leaving with all of us.
Yeah, my last words will be, I mean, for everyone to understand that artists are capable to be the best version of themselves in any way, and you also as an audience, and try and find within you not necessarily to force to engage, but to open up your mind, on open up your presence when an artist is in the process of creating work, and try and engage in the process of creating that work and the process of presenting the work, and not just wants to see the aesthetics, but understanding behind the scenes of the work, because performance art carries a lot of dynamics.
I will just end on that, what you've just said, Brasilia, is almost that thing of, instead of asking the performer, oh, but why did you do that? Ask yourself, how did that make me feel? Because that is sometimes all we want to do, is we want you to feel something, and we don't want to explain to you what we felt when we went into it. So that's my ending.
I wish everybody could see what I just saw right now. When Karen said, how did it make you feel? Owezile and Babine were just clapping, and Gavin just had a beautiful smile without the teeth, just to sort of acknowledge what Karen would say. And I think that's just a beautiful ending. I'd like to thank Artfluence for this beautiful festival. To Karen, thank you. Gavin, thank you. Babin, thank you. Owezile, thank you. And to everybody who's watching today, thank you so much for engaging with us and sitting here with us. Good night.
Moments and memories make magic and movies shared between sons and daughters, or just friends in their quarter. More music, more movement, more space for amusement, where history was made and the future is paved. Adventure awaits. Together, embraced, just down the highway. Think Midlands, my way.